Hey, I'm Sith King.
And I'm Sonic Sons.
We're the Rambling Reviewers.
And today we're looking at an exceptionally serious and grim film.
By which we mean we're looking at The Adventures of Captain Underpants, the first epic movie.
Oh my goodness, this film was exactly what it was advertised. They knew what they were going for. You are a fan of the books. I barely was aware of them. We both liked it though. I mean, a lot of energy.
Yeah, it's not like it was...
It wasn't brilliant, but I mean,
it's...
Well, it was almost like brilliant in doing what it wanted to do. There must be so many kids that found this like super uproariously amazing, and we were like, maybe not quite into that as much as the target audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie called Captain Underpants. Okay, a little backstory. The book series is a book series by Dave Pilkey. And, yeah, that's spelled D-A-V, Pilkey. But, okay. It was based, at least partially, on his experiences from his childhood, where he did like to create comic books, similar to the film and the series' leads, George Beard and Harold Hutchins. See, there was a small problem with Dave. He was what you'd call non-neurotypical. Specifically, he had ADHD, or ADD. I can't remember if there's a difference.
I'm sure there's
and
a
the first person to
scientific
comment, there's
that.
one letter difference. I will reach through the computer and stab you. And dyslexia. This was not the era where schools had the most understanding view of people who didn't fit into the mold. In fact, they considered people like Dave to be disruptive influences who were just plain bad. Not people who had legitimate problems at school and didn't really know how to handle them.
This school was not very accommodating to people like Dave.
Heck with this school, the whole school system.
Yeah, the whole world.
Fortunately, by the time we grew up, the school system was more accommodating to people with different abilities, like Asperger's, special education. These things are much more common nowadays. I'm not saying that he didn't have legitimate grievances.
And I think the schools even nowadays need to change a lot, but there's a long rant I'll skip right now.
Let's both skip that.
But good for Dave for making his taking something that was hard for him and then making it something so happy and productive later in life. He took inspiration from his difficulties and made this story about kids who have difficulties with a ridiculous principle.
A ridiculously authoritarian principle. Now, okay. So basically the story is that two kids go to Jerome Horwitz Elementary School in Piqua, Ohio. Their names are George Beard and Harold Hutchins. And just a little minor thing, I'd like to say that it's pretty impressive that George and Harold, they're a black kid and a white kid, and yet neither is shown as being dominant.
Yeah, yeah.
There isn't one person who obviously takes the lead all the time.
Yeah.
They're pretty much equal. Except George might be a little smarter, but...
And then
George is the black guy, so,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm not okay, this is coming out a little more racist than I intended, but...
No, what we're trying to say is, isn't it neat that these sort of things can just happen casually, and we've gone beyond the era where it would have been scandalous 50 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
And speaking of things that were scandalous, in the final Captain Underpants book... Okay, when I say final, I'm saying that with air quotes, because Dave Pilkey put out this on his website. This next book will be the final Captain Underpants book. But it's fine if you don't believe that. I wouldn't believe me either. They go to the future because the last few Captain Underpants books will make your head explode if you try to comprehend them in terms of time travel. Look, at one point there's at least 3 of one character trying to murder themselves.
Wow.
Because they can't... It's the Professor Poopy Pants character. Except that it's him from 3 different time periods. None of them trust each other and are trying to scheme to become the best one and take their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how this gets confusing quickly. Well, George and Harold go to the future, and it's revealed that Harold is gay, has a husband, and adopted
Whoa.
kids. And no one gives a shit.
Hey.
I mean, well, no one cares, at least. I mean, it's just something that is.
Yeah, nobody's bothered by it.
Which has really helped in recent years. The series has experienced a bit of a revival in the minds of people, that is. Not to say that, he's been putting out new books, but yeah. Dave also liked to hide in messages about how, well, authoritarianness is not necessarily good for children. By which
indeed.
he means it's absolutely not good for children.
Absolutely terrible for children. I love the way they depicted that in this movie.
Yeah.
He's got like a picture on his wall of just a boot crushing an ant, and it says, authority. Like, yeah, if that's your conception of your job as a principal, no wonder all the kids in this school hate you.
Yeah, well, yeah. To be fair, okay, George and Harold are pranksters. They love to pull pranks and make people's lives interesting. To be absolutely fair on the side of authority, I know what they said in the film. Someone has to... The obviously bad guy kid says, well, someone has to stick up for authority. I actually agree with that. Even though he's supposed to be wrong, I believe that someone should stick up for authority, or at least you shouldn't always have a narrative that is purely one-sided.
Well, by the end of the movie, they managed to have some sympathy for Krupp, don't they?
For the principal, yeah. Yes, that is true. However, if you look at it from the other side, on the one side, George and Harold are striking a blow for the freedom of children and making sure that there's laughter in schools and people are entertained and things are happy. On the other hand, you could easily say that they are very disruptive influences who ruin people's attempts to learn at this facility, and that their impressions of their teachers as being really too strict might just be because they don't mesh well with their personality. Other kids might not have a problem with these teachers.
Well, the only way to judge that within the context of the movie is to see what the other kids think about it, and apparently everyone except Melvin is very sad with the way things are going right now.
And given that they break the fourth wall all the time, stop time, and at one point portrayed the film in sock puppets and flip-o-rama.
That was amazing. The sock puppets.
I'm not saying that George and Harold aren't the heroes of their own story. I'm just saying that we should consider that maybe they shouldn't be considered reliable sources in this case, considering they control the entire medium of the film.
Well, they do control the entire medium of the film, I'll give you that. Which was interesting how much the film played with itself that way, as we just referenced, with the art shift into suddenly it's sock puppets, and now it's a flipmation, now it's a comic thing, animated, and now it's 3D animation, and now he stops time all of a sudden to address the audience directly. I liked that bounciness to it, the general energy.
Oh yeah, that was nice. Okay, I'm getting really off track here.
I know, we're getting to the nature of authority, and I'm going to be like, well, now let's come up with 1,001 real-life examples that'll get us entirely away from the movie, so... Okay,
so let's just say that I am a little more in favor of authority, and I'm not as big of a fan of pranksters, so...
And I think Sudbury schools are awesome, so that's not have to do with pranksters, but it's something
to do with... But let's get on before we get into the debate about Sudbury schools I think that they're bong-smoking hippie plants.
Some kids do well, and I'm going to really agree on that. Some kids... At least some.
Okay. Anyways, so it starts off with George and Harold, and they have created an origin story for their favorite hero, Captain Underpants.
It's an origin story very similar to Superman's.
By which it means it was entirely a ripoff of one. Yeah. Basically, everyone on Underpanty World, which looks like Earth, except that it has a pair of tidy whities on, was happy and stuff until their planet exploded for no reason.
Just like Krypton.
Okay, Krypton, they actually did go back and say why it was exploding, but...
It took them a while to get to it. I still haven't heard.
Apparently there was a civil war that went on, and one faction unleashed a doomsday weapon on Krypton, and that caused the core to start to undergo nuclear either fission or fusion.
So there was a war going on this time.
But that was 1,000 years ago, and 1,000 years... Later, Krypton started to actually explode because this was a really slow process.
Oh. Well, then.
Yeah, which I'm kind of upset that they left out the fact that in the comics, in the books, Underpanty World was destroyed by the Wedgie warlords.
Yeah, they'll just retcon that within the movie if they feel like it, because it's already a story within a story.
Okay, but I digress. They start off showing that, this was basically Captain Underpants' origin story, except that instead of being raised by Kansas people, they were raised by dolphins. He was raised by dolphins.
Kansas dolphins, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, so that should really tell you everything you need to know about this story. So, and then they get called to the principal's office for drawing Captain Underpants comics. Oh no, how horrible! And then he pulls them into the office and he says, I suspect the two of you are pranksters, but I can't prove it. Now get out of here. There really was no point to this scene except to establish that Mr. Krupp doesn't like George and Harold and that they're pranksters.
To be fair,
it didn't advance the plot in any way. You could have removed this whole scene and it really wouldn't have made a difference. He doesn't punish them or yell at them.
He does yell at them. He yells at them every time he sees their faces.
Okay, well, he doesn't say, I'm going to call your parents. He just basically complains about them to them.
The point, though, is that Krupp himself is ridiculous and will do things that don't make sense because he wants to be projecting his power all the time.
Okay, so yes, but it doesn't really suit the purpose of the plot in any way. There's nothing that happens in this scene.
I mean, I thought it was helpful to see their interactions with Krupp, their sense of their watching each other's back and sticking up for each other in the midst of what otherwise would be a threatening situation. Not that anything again really pivotal happened, but it was character building. Okay.
If I had written the scene, I would have written it so that, he pulls them in and says, did you do this? No, you can ask this person. And, some of the kids would give them an alibi, saying, oh, they were with us.
You could have made it more complex.
That would have made,
I could see that.
That would have made it seem like they were heroes to the kids for providing this entertainment in their dull and boring, meaningless lives.
Yes, I do think the weird disco scene later on sort of established that too. They walk in with the boomboxes and stuff, and everyone's like, "This is super fun." Yeah, but yes, you could have done that earlier in the movie and established it earlier. I get that.
And it would have given the scene a purpose.
Okay.
The whole movie is just so fucking weird. Then it's revealed that everyone has to come in on Saturday for the invention convention. For some reason, even though only Melvin is providing inventions.
That's exactly the point. Krupp likes Melvin and wants to lord it over everybody.
Okay, in the second book, Captain Underpants and the Talking Toilets, everyone presented an invention, including Melvin. Except for George and Harold. The reason why they screwed up the invention convention was because the previous year at that invention convention, they showed off their invention. A type of glue that specifically activates when exposed to body heat, so they glued literally every single person in the audience to their chairs. And they were kicked out, and they were said, Mr. Krupp said, you guys are not allowed to be at the invention convention because you're going to glue us to the chairs or something else stupid.
Now, to your point, that particular prank is clearly a disruptive thing that goes too far.
Exactly.
Which is why they changed it for this movie.
And then what they did, because George and Harold were banned from attending the invention convention because they disrupted it last year and caused a lot of people a lot of trouble, they decided to break into the invention convention and sabotage all of the inventions.
Okay, so I'm getting more of a vibe of the reason you were judging them a bit in this movie is because of the crap they pulled in the books.
Yeah,
which is stuff I'm unaware of. So and that's part of the difference in our perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, it was funny when it first happened, when you first read it, but then you look back on it and it's like, someone worked really hard on this stuff, and they're just breaking it because they were jerks and are paying the price?
Yeah, no, that's not very just the way it worked in the books. In the movie, it made more sense.
Yeah, in the invention convention, Melvin reveals his latest invention, the Turbo Toilet 2000. Now, this has changed from the books, obviously, because Melvin invented a photocopier that could make anything like a replicator.
Wow.
So George and Harold decided, it's probably still a photocopier. Let's photocopy the cover of our latest Captain Underpants story. Captain Underpants and the Attack of the Talking Toilets. That's where the talking toilets came from in the movie.
In the
in the book.
In the book, yeah.
But that's where the talking toilets.
Right, the movie has them later. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I'm kind of disappointed at how they handled the Turbo Toilet 2000 in the movie, because that was always one of my favorite villains, because he was basically the Incredible Hulk, but as a toilet robot. I was 7. Sue me.
Oh, I get it.
Well, George and Harold sabotage it, the Turbo Toilet, so it starts playing his playlist and firing TP everywhere. Meanwhile, Melvin's latest invention, which actually is an invention that I think would be really good. It's a turtle doll that has a camera inside of it. I mean, like, if you put that into someone's room, like some little kids, you could keep an eye on them so that they don't hurt themselves. Or it would be like the nanny cams. Like,
that's exactly what he called it, a nanny cam. If you saw it, is a nanny cam, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't really... Anyways, the nanny cam catches them seeing it, and Krupp says he's going to do the dastardly deed of splitting apart their friendship by moving them to separate rooms. Classrooms! To which I leaned over to Sonic and said, "Sir, you do know that they live next door to each other, right? They live 50 feet away. They can yell at each other from their rooms. They can see each other anytime they look out the window. This is not an effective plan.
Yeah,
this is a very stupid plan that they're treating like it's the end of the world when they literally hang out all the time in their treehouse, which straddles the property line of their yards."
Yeah, you could have done it more effectively / plausibly if, say one of their parents or something is going to be upset when they learn about this, and there's been talk of moving to another different town, and this would tip the balance in favor of that.
In the original book, I won't say it's handled more plausibly, but it's handled a little better. Basically, Krupp catches evidence of them doing horrible things at the football game, sabotaging the whole thing, covering everything in pepper, filling the football with helium, just like making the game miserable for everyone else. So basically, which they didn't have to do.
Which, again, that's a jerk move. I'll give you that.
No, they didn't have to do that. If they wanted everyone miserable at the football game, they should have just let the football game play. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. And then he was holding the footage blackmail, saying, if you don't basically become my servants, I'm going to tell your parents and the football team will kick your ass. Okay, I admit that's still a really jerkish thing to do, but that at least provides some sort of motivation for them to want to do what they did with Krupp.
Right, well, I liked the way they did it, though, with this. If you're going to go, with the basis they do, is that they quickly go to the sock puppet scene.
Okay, yes, this was... I'm not complaining about this scene. I'm just complaining about the impetus for the plot is that's so weak.
Well, that's just what I'm saying, though, is the sock puppet scene, in part, was lampshading that. Like... Okay, let's imagine a scenario where because we got separated, that somehow we're not friends anymore, or we just barely even see each other, and then robots attack, and then other stuff. Like, it's just like, yes, we know this is implausible, but come on, go with it, because the kids, they just imagine that it's disaster.
Although one thing I did like is that they did pass by the store, everything except fabric softener, which played a big part in the 5th book.
So references everywhere. Mom,
yeah. There's tons of references. Yeah. This was well researched, if nothing else. Although research implying that they read all the Captain Underpants books, so I'm not 100% sure exactly how that counts. Yeah. So they decide to use the 3D Hypno Ring, which they build up kind of epically by saying that it was forged from this dark demonic plastic in the deepest depths of Imperial China. Like, they build it up to...
And he's clearly making this up as he goes, but he's doing a great job of it. Yeah.
It's like he's describing how the One Ring of Power was forged in Mount Doom. Although something that always that bugged me about that, why didn't they just tie the one ring to like a big metal pole and stick it up in a lightning storm? After all, lightning is hotter than the surface of the sun. You'd think that would melt the one ring in like 30 seconds.
I'm gonna have to say magic.
I'm gonna have to say fuck you. Fuck you, lightning. Thor! Look, I'm sorry, but in the eternal battle between Sauron and Thor, I'm going with Thor every time.
That would be an interesting crossover.
I know, right?
He just flies right up to the eyeball.
He just starts smacking it. No, not zapping, just smacking it with a hammer. Okay, but... and he manages to hypnotize him. Somehow. They basically gave mind control devices out in boxes of cereal.
I can only assume this particular ring was especially potent.
Yeah, in the books that wasn't the case. They actually had to recall all of the 3D hypno rings that they bought because, it had the opposite effect on women. If you told them to do anything, they'd do the opposite.
Weird.
And yes, TV Tropes has described exactly how fridge horror that would be.
Yes. I can only imagine.
And yes, George and Harold were responsible for the events of that book, too. Though, to be fair, the prank really should have fizzled out way sooner than it did.
Also, somebody should not have manufactured hypno rings in the first place. Whatever that happened.
Hypno rings that worked, apparently. Jesus. Anyway. So they tell him to be a monkey and be a chicken. And then finally they tell him to become Captain Underpants. And he does. And while they're laughing about it, he jumps out a second-story window, runs into the street, and gets hit by a car. And then shrugs it off, and then he assaults a mime, thinking that the invisible box is literal, tosses an old woman in a tree to be with the cat that's stuck up there, and then tries to attack a giant inflatable purple gorilla. Because this is this movie.
And the kids are running behind him the whole time.
Oh, Lord God.
And then they finally... What do they do? Oh, well, they figure out how to turn him on and off. Whenever they splash him with water, he turns back to Krupp. And whenever they snap their fingers, he turns back to Captain Underpants.
I personally added the section on weak sauce weakness on the TV Tropes page for Captain Underpants. His weakness is a substance that covers 70% of the surface of the Earth.
He is a very silly hero to begin with.
Okay, yeah, but still, though.
And they never do think to hypnotize him again and just make him do something else because they can't live with either Krupp or Underpants as the plot progresses. Krupp being mean and Captain Underpants being just constantly causing havoc because he's so weird.
Yeah. Ugh.
So they take Krupp back, once they get him unconscious, take him back to his house, where they discover he's very alone in the world.
And boring. Yeah. Which is kind of a nice subversion, because you totally expect him to his house to be full of evil stuff, which they openly lampshade. But it's really boring. It's just, okay, there's a TV. And he has a fridge, but there's only one bottle of ketchup inside of it. He has drawers, but there's only one fork. There's only one place set out at the table. His bathroom has a towel labeled his and another one labeled still his, which I will admit I use 2 towels in the bathroom too. I cycle through them, but that's just me.
The point is in the scene. It was pointing out the aloneness of it.
Which I do, looking back on it, there was kind of a subtle theme that was running through the whole thing, that Krupp was just lonely.
Yeah, I liked that. I liked that he had another side to him that the kids could eventually discover.
Earlier in the film, we also meet Edith, who is a lunch lady, and I'm pretty sure is an original character for this film. I mean, there were lunch ladies, but they all quit after George and Harold accidentally tricked them into creating a flood of green goop. Actually, this one wasn't their fault. They only meant for one batch of the cupcakes to be made, and they decided to make it in a gigantic cauldron. And they ignored the basic cooking instructions, which included vinegar, baking soda, and please bake at 45 degrees for 5 hours.
Wow. That's a slow
That's
cooker.
really dumb. And no, that wasn't a thing of, they meant Celsius. No, they did not mean Celsius. They meant Fahrenheit. So you need to put them in the fridge. Yeah, there really should have been a couple tip-offs there. Anyways, but Edith and Mr. Krupp flirt. Like, badly, but they do flirt, and it's kind of interesting, because Mr. Krupp never had a love interest in the stories, as far as I can
thought
remember.
Edith was interesting, too. Her shyness and whatever. I like the visual of her one eye always being obscured until she kind of, gets out of her shell later.
Yeah. I mean, it provided a humanizing aspect for Mr. Krupp, and showed that, even these authority figures that you despise have, chinks in their armor. But then Professor Poopy Pants comes, or as he calls himself, Professor P. See, he comes from New Switzerland, and they have a tradition of having really silly names. This is a terrible tradition, and it should be immediately stopped. Anyways, he has possibly the worst job interview I've ever seen on TV, and that is including ones where it's just gimmicks. Which I say with confident authority because he throws around dynamite and axes.
Just clearing out his briefcase to get to his resume, which says he's hell-bent on revenge and so forth.
And as for where he's been the last few years, it openly says he's been in a dark place. That's just what it says.
I'd like to sympathize with people who have been through dark places, but at the same time, maybe don't get revenge on the world with axes and grenades and stuff.
I was going to say, if you've been in a dark place, well, I sympathize with you. Don't put that on your resume.
That's not typical resume etiquette. I must give you that,
That's not on any etiquette. That's terrible.
Wow.
And because Mr. Krupp is in his Captain Underpants mode, he hires him. Despite the fact that he openly says he wants revenge on the world and wants to get rid of laughter.
Captain Underpants is not so smart.
I'd say this is massively out of character for Mr. Krupp, except that literally he has a job interview with 3 space aliens whose only disguise is that they're wearing gloves and fake wigs. And they say, he asks them, do you have any references? No. Do you have any experience? No. Do you know how to cook? No. You're hired! I really wish that wasn't an exact quote. Okay, maybe not exact. It's been a little while. So Professor Poopy Pants, or Professor P as he likes to be called, starts teaching the children. And by teaching, I mean outlining his evil. By pointing out, I hate the laughter of children. I hate laughter. My goal is to rid the world of laughter. Then he starts outlining portions of the brain. And he incorrectly labels one portion of the brain as the part responsible for laughter.
Yeah, very silly name for it, yeah.
Except that that's very clearly the cerebrum and the brainstem. They're like the only identifiable parts of the brain. It's like there's only 3 pieces of the brain that's like easily drawable. The cerebellum, the cerebrum, and the brainstem. And you've listed 2 of them as the part responsible for... Okay, screw it. So his plan is to get rid of laughter by removing that part of the brain, which is creepy as all shit. You know what? I don't think he actually does too badly up until George and Harold decide, let's release a comic book making fun of his real name, Professor Poopy Pants. This would be... Wow. Look, I don't agree with what he was trying to do. I don't think it's nice to laugh at people's names. But putting out a comic for the sole purpose of making everyone laugh at you...
They do apologize to him later in the
film.
film.
Yeah, they really... Okay, and when Poopy Pants says, oh yeah, you guys are real nice, it's obvious why. They're not apologizing because they're actually genuinely sorrowful. They're apologizing because the mad scientist has a giant robot and is trying to kill them.
Well, I don't know, actually, because they went on for a while about how silly names are cool, and what if I had a silly name? And you would, they honestly seem to be thinking it was all just good fun,
Yes. But thinking someone with a silly name is good fun is probably not a smart idea when dealing with someone whose silly name is causing him to try to alter the fabric of human consciousness on the planet.
I will grant you that was not a smart move at that point.
Yeah, but putting out a comic specifically to make fun of someone's name just because you don't agree with their position.
Right, I know. Well, we're conflating between the more reasonable... making fun of a real-life person would be terribly wrong, and then this making fun of a even from the very beginning, proto supervillain, like the role resume scene we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's like a very, very ridiculous, exaggerated scenario we're looking at here.
To be fair, though, making fun of his name is what drove him to become a proto-supervillain.
Yeah,
driving him from
still a bad idea.
He was trying to create an invention that would reduce traffic in the world and end world hunger at the same time.
And then everybody laughed at him at like the Nobel Peace Prize.
They wouldn't.
It was like the Nobel Peace Science Prize, they called it, or something silly like that.
I don't think they wanted to be associated with this movie. But still, though, okay. So he eventually Professor Poopy Pants eventually finds that there's one kid, Melvin, who doesn't have a sense of humor at all. I just feel like they're picking on Melvin at this point, you know.
I did kind of think to myself during the movie, like, I hope we're not giving off a vibe that nerdy kids are necessarily the bad ones, because he's the only nerd in this.
Yeah, and he's the only one who openly supports authority. I mean, look, I sympathize with Melvin here, honestly. He's just trying to learn, and everyone's a jerk to him.
Well, again, we have to grab for, okay, what exactly was established in the show versus what we assume versus this versus that.
Also, they kind of, you know, sabotaged his invention and tied him up in toilet paper, humiliating him in front of the entire school. I can kind of understand Melvin tattling on the kids.
That I can see, yeah.
Okay, so he basically discovers Melvin has absolutely no portion of the brain relating to the sense of humor. Considering this is the brain stem and the cerebrum, Melvin should be dead.
He is a very special individual. And a zombie.
So Professor Poopy Pants manages to weaponize the kid and turn him into a ray gun to remove everyone's sense of humor. But before we do that, there's kind of a weird scene where, you know, George and Harold use their influence over Mr. Krupp / Captain Underpants to try to make the school a better place. And okay, getting the music and art departments reopened, that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah, perfectly fine educational pursuit, as you might say.
Yeah, he then puts all the teachers into detention. Unlike in the books, where the teachers were shown as being jerks, the worst we got was them going, shh, or dribbling a basketball. We didn't really get
they got that they were super boring, but that's not the same level as abuse that Krupp himself gets into.
Yeah. And then there's this carnival scene which just seems to exist to show George and Harold must learn that they're playing God.
Is a bad idea, because this Captain Underpants guy keeps getting into crazy shenanigans.
Yeah. Which, really, maybe you should have had adult supervision at this carnival.
It was a carnival set up by Captain Underpants. Remember, he was not thinking very smartly about this or anything.
But I don't know, the scene where, you know, it starts raining and Captain Underpants turns back into Krupp and they can't turn him back, it felt like it was for a different scene. Like, George and Harold had, like, set the building on fire or something, or done something far worse than what they actually did. Okay, yes, they did technically crash a Ferris wheel. Thanks to Captain Underpants, a Ferris wheel did crash into the side of the school. Granted, but it still felt like it was out of place. Like, they meant for a different scene to be here, but
I can kind of see what you're getting at. Yeah.
Like, remember the scene in A Bug's Life where it's revealed that the mighty warriors that Flick brings back are actually circus performers, and it's revealed to everyone?
Yeah.
That would have been the sort of scene that leads into
right.
one.
So it was portrayed like there was a big moral failing on their part almost.
Which, admittedly, they're mind controlling the principal.
Admittedly, they're mind controlling the principal, but that wasn't really explained or been like, hey, we really regret what we've done. It was more like, oh, bad fortune has come upon us all of a sudden because now it's raining and now we're in trouble.
And even the scene with Mr. Krupp later on is like, okay, why is this a moral failing on his part? He's punishing students who have broken the rules, except he's like, yes, I've done this. And then he looks at the casserole that Edith prepared him and he's like, but now I'm sad. Maybe I did the wrong thing. Except he doesn't say that, but...
Well,
okay,
I guess would seem to call back to... There was a bit where he was in Captain Underpants mode and was able to flirt with her much more easily. because of that. And he's thinking like, oh, is there something positive in the midst of this negative type of a thing?
But I would agree with you, but A, that would recall him remembering what happens as Captain Underpants, in which case I would definitely, if I was Mr. Krupp and I remembered what happened to me as Captain Underpants, I would kick these kids' asses. I don't care if there's laws against it. You made me run around in my underwear. And the second point is, it doesn't really... Considering that the previous scene had George and Harold staring out the window like, we screwed up and this was a moral failing on our part, and it showed this twice, the third time was with Mr. Krupp. He looks at the thing, and he's at the casserole, and he's like, oh no. But the mood that in that scene does not match the previous two tones.
Well, it's still a mood of sadness and longing.
But for different reasons. It's.
I mean, it didn't really bug me in the moment, but I don't know. I guess we can analyze it some more. I'm not sure what to say. Because soon enough we get back to zaniness, don't we? That is our bread and butter here.
Yeah, the Professor Poopy Pants uses the growth ray on the Turbo Toilet 2000 and then fuels it with leftovers from Edith's cooking.
Which are apparently like toxic.
Good night, everybody! Yeah, so, and then he uses it as a giant robot, and again, I'm really upset. This is what they reduced the Turbo Toilet 2000 to, when he was kind of awesome.
Was he like an independent villain before?
He was an independent villain. Yeah. In fact, he had 2 books. First was Attack of the Talking Toilets, in which he beat Captain Underpants, and then another one where he came back from the planet Uranus.
Naturally.
But anyways, the Turbo Toilet is also now a high-tech lab that Poopy Pants has that has the anti-laughter brain-removing ray.
Powered by Melvin.
Powered by Melvin, because, that's the most efficient use of technology. To just strap a kid in and project his lack of humor into the world. What?
I don't think physics really makes sense in this world of theirs.
Okay, I'm willing to buy that. So he decides, now I'll just zap everyone in the school. By everyone, he means everyone on this side of the building. And it can apparently be blocked with a single brick wall. And just by ducking, you could, avoid all of this.
You see, we had to make a tactical analysis of the anti-humor ray, and yes, there are some flaws in the design.
And, anyone who's in the bathroom, that would also not affect them. Or on the other side of the building. Or in gym class. Or the cafeteria. Or in the hallway.
Yeah, we don't see any of those kids, though, do we?
So this only would affect, about 15 people. Yeah. Yeah. And it's at this point that Captain Underpants fights the Turbo Toilet 2000 in Fliporama.
Yay.
Yay.
Took that right out of the books.
Oh, yeah. But what's funny is they even make fun of that because they run out of paper, at the last page when they're supposed to be, doing the saving thing.
And so suddenly it's back to real life.
It's back to CGI.
Yeah, CGI real life.
And this is where things get stupid.
I was about to say.
Because they basically try to say, Melvin, get out of there! You're helping Professor Poopy Pants! Oddly enough, the guy who will do anything to please a superior decides to squeal on them. I mean, I wouldn't be bothered by this, except that he's known to have squealed multiple times on them before this point. Okay, well, I guess it's not that big of a deal. But anyways, Poopy Pants grabs them and starts to blast them with the humor removal thing, and it's revealed that 90% of George and Harold's brains are this laughter part. Which I don't think is physically possible. No. I'm pretty sure that's deadly.
And then we get to our little cartoon with the talking parts of their brains thing. The brains are talking to each other for a little bit.
Yeah, and while it shows the laughter parts shrinking away to nothingness, suddenly they're reminded by Professor Poopy Pants of
the planet Uranus.
Yeah, which is, talking about that was how they first met, and so suddenly they start laughing, and this reverses the beam somehow. And also stops the beam because laughter forms a shield. What?
The literal ha-ha-has are written out on the frame at this point. You're like, yep.
And this somehow
This is how it works.
And because this one component fails, the Turbo Toilet 2000 starts malfunctioning miserably.
Made by those same people who made that robot in charge of the Logan 5 world. What was it called? Her name? Overseer. Remember this? He shows up with his testimony, and the robot is so confused that like the entire city blows up and shuts down. Like,
oh my god!
Wow!
Logan's Run, yeah.
poorly designed there.
Yep. And so it's over, right? Well, wrong, because Professor Poopy Pants now has his shrinking and growth ray.
Yeah, it was just extended action scene at this point.
Mostly. But don't worry, because Captain Underpants drank some of the leftovers that have been sitting inside of this toilet.
And gets actual superpowers from that.
Yeah.
And they lampshade that too. One of the kids is like, "This is a totally foreseeable twist that I did not foresee coming."
And then Poopy Pants realizes he's defeated and they take the growth ray away from him. Except then he gets shot by the growth ray, and he has to fight them again.
And then they shrink him eventually.
Okay, at this point I was starting to get a little sick of it. Just end the scene. Then Captain Underpants, being the brilliant person that he is, decides to put the school back to where it was, sideways. Yeah, because that won't cause hundreds of thousands of dollars of infrastructure.
Did you ever read the Wayside school books?
I was thinking exactly that.
I hope that was a reference. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Also, they turned like a songbird into something the size of Rodin. So,
I love the screech it made at the end. Like, it really sounded like a...
Oh, and if you notice, all the cops started running away.
Yeah.
And then, after that, they go back to the treehouse. And they're like, well, now we have to get rid of Captain Underpants. Why? Okay, he caused some trouble, but, like, explain shit to him. He's clearly a better principal than Krupp was. Just tell him, tell Captain Underpants, here's what you need to do. Why do you have to get rid of him permanently? You have a guy with superpowers willing to do your every command. Why is this a thing you need to get rid of?
Well...
Okay, yes, moral dilemma, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But they decide that, looking back on it, Mr. Krupp has had such a lonely life that they're going to do something nice. And so they set up Edith with Mr. Krupp. Which is interesting because in the books when they tried this, they tried to get him to marry a different teacher, and this ended up catastrophically backfiring.
What happened?
Well, Mr. Krupp was so stunned that he couldn't deny it. The teacher was just grumpy about the whole thing until at the altar she said, "No, I can't stand you." Mr. Krupp finally snaps out of it and says, "This is all George and Harold's fault." To which I say, "No, this is your fucking fault for A, not speaking up sooner and saying, hey, I don't want to get married."
This is an important thing to communicate to your fiancé.
Yeah, also, and this is kind of important, she tries to punish George and Harold for this thing that could have been easily prevented by her speaking up because she didn't have the shock thing going on. So they tried to hypnotize her, and they, of course, say, well, don't do anything crazy, like become the Wicked Wedgie Woman, or try to destroy Captain Underpants.
And then has the reverse effect.
Yeah. Okay, so, yeah, they smash the 3D Hypno Ring, and for some reason that knocks Captain Underpants out of Mr. Krupp, except that when Mr. Krupp is at the restaurant on the date with Edith, well, they dispose of the Turbo Toilet 2000 in the toilet recycling plant, which that's a thing now, except that all the goo from inside of it, not that kind of goo, floods over all the other toilets, turning them into the talking toilets. An army of carnivorous toilets screaming, "Yum, yum, eat 'em up." So Mr. Krupp reaches out and snaps his fingers to summon the waitress. Snapping his fingers is how he turns into Captain Underpants.
And it turns out that still works.
Yep. And the end of the last line of the film was said by Harold, and it was, "Here we go again," which is how the first 5 or 6 Captain Underpants books actually ended.
Oh, well, that's a nice touch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then they find out that one lady is still on hold.
Yep.
from the rest of the movie.
Yep.
Yep.
And that was The Adventures of Captain Underpants, ended by versions of the songs we heard in this film, but done with what was the word I'm looking for? Quality.
Yeah, it was
not
there,
shit.
There were 2 songs in the film. The short little bit about Saturday, and then they took a bit from the Hallelujah chorus with new lyrics. And it's hard to screw up the Hallelujah chorus, but even that felt a little off. And the one about Saturday felt more off. It was just it was weird. It was not fully musical.
I commented to Sonic that here that when Mr. Krupp canceled the music program, it wasn't so much about saving money. It was more about Mercy killing it.
I would like to counter that maybe this is what their songs sound like after the program's been canceled, and this is why they need it back. Okay, kids, here's how you write a better song about Saturday.
Step 1. Any song about Saturday would be better.
Just don't hire Rebecca Black.
God damn it. I was trying to avoid making that joke. God damn it. So that was The Adventures of Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. How was it? It was fun.
Yeah, it was exactly what they're going for.
It wasn't
self-aware.
It wasn't gonna be Babylon 5. It wasn't gonna be Pacific Rim. It wasn't even gonna be frickin' How to Train Your Dragon, which is another DreamWorks film that really kicks ass. But really, it wasn't bad. It was funny. It did exactly what it set out to do.
Yeah, I can't find any really major fault in it. Everything.
And any faults that we can find with it would also just apply to the genre as a whole of silly films. Oh, this didn't make sense. It's a film about a talking toilet.
So clearly. And as I said at the beginning of this review, there's probably a whole lot of kids who find all the potty humor to be so hilarious that overrides everything else right there. So vibrant stuff. I like the characters. I like our 2 main leads particularly. They had chemistry, I guess is the word. I mean, just energy between them. They were clearly good friends, and they would bounce ideas off each other.
Have to say, they seem like they don't have a lot of individual personality. It was more like one person in 2 bodies.
They actually said that at one point. They something very similar. They're like, yeah, you have almost the same thoughts as I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, no,
they're pretty flat characters. They do the right thing.
Yeah, they have their interesting but not especially differentiated. It wasn't flat in the sense of I was just bored with them. It was just okay, they are kind of similar, but that worked. It worked pretty well.
They don't really undergo character growth in this film. I mean, they realize, I guess we can be apart for a few hours. But that's not really character growth. That's accepting that you don't... That's a lesson I learned when I couldn't bring my stuffed animal to kindergarten. That's a lesson I learned when I couldn't sit next to my friends. It's not a really big character thing.
No, at the same time, they film creators weren't much aiming for that, were they?
No, they weren't, but it's...
Yeah, no, obviously it's not the best movie ever, but...
So anyways, we liked it.
Yeah.
Good for a watch if you want some chuckles. I guess I'm Sith King.
And I'm Sonic Sons.
Signing off.